Post. I'm the legal director for the Secular Coalition for Arizona, and I will be the facilitator for tonight's meeting. As you know, we've been having a series of virtual talks with a variety of different candidates for a variety of different offices. And for this particular talk, we did ask the other candidate for this position to be here tonight, but the only person who responded affirmatively was Adrian Francis, so he is the only one here who is here tonight. So we'll have a 30-minute discussion with him. We're doing this series because we want to make sure that our members are educated about the things that are most important to them. So I'm going to turn it over to Adrian. He will have a statement, and then we will have questions from the audience. So be sure to put your questions in the Q&A or in the chat. And Lindsay and I will I'll ask the questions, and then we'll get our 30 minutes. Okay, so Adrian, I'm turning it over to you. Go.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Diane. And thank you to the coalition for what you do, which is, I think more than anything else, is to be thoughtful. And that's critically important nowadays, because I think there's a lot of people who are not thinking about what's important for the Republic, what is important for our state, and what's important for our future. Again, my name is Adrian Francis. I'm running for Arizona Secretary of State. And I'm running because I want my 3 teenage daughters to be able to have choices, because democracy is a decision. But I don't just want them to have choices about what they do with their bodies or how they vote. I want them to be able to choose a whole host of other things. And we can do this if we have a government that is run by people who want to kind of just do their jobs and get out of the way. We're facing a group of folks and candidates on the other side of what I call the divide. It's not really another side of an aisle, because we've got a lot of Republicans and independents that support my Democratic nomination. The folks that really are more interested in chaos and instability. They're more interested in doubts and division than they are in just making sure things happen well. And I don't want to do completely us versus them. I certainly want to introduce myself real quickly here in a minute. But the stakes are so high in this race and in this election season that it's not, I don't think it's responsible to avoid the serious issue. And the serious issue is we are at the precipice of losing this republic. And I'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute. But first of all, as a matter of introduction, again, Adrian Francis, I was born and raised down on the Mexican border to a family who's been in that region of the world since at least the 1690s, as far as we can tell. My great-grandfather had to learn how to speak Yaqui to marry his bride. My grandfather, who never made it past the 8th grade, became the mayor of Nogales, Arizona, really illustrating the opportunities that this country affords to folks. And, you know, our family is an American dream sort of a family. My sister's an educator. I'm an attorney. My next 3 cousins are a businessman, an attorney, and an accountant. The next 3 cousins are another attorney, a pediatrician, and a high-level tech executive. The next 3 include 2 tech executives and another, I think, accountant. I'm not sure. Then there's an architect and so on. But this is what education has given to our family, and what that drive towards betterment has given to our family in the form of the American dream. I am a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. And as an attorney, I did a lot to uphold and protect the rights of individuals. And then I got angry one day, pretty angry enough to change my whole life. And I ran for Maricopa County Recorder. And I became an election administrator through the service of what became the 2nd largest voting jurisdiction in the United States, which is Maricopa County. And as a certified election and registration administrator, we increased the number of registered voters in Maricopa County by 500,000 in just 4 years. We went from 2.1 to 2.6 million voters. And in that same time frame, we increased the number of ballots cast in Maricopa County, even during a global pandemic, by 600,000 ballots. And that's because we created systems to communicate with voters. The ballot tracking system that you may have seen online today, showing people, hey, your ballot's in the mail, it's getting mailed out to you. I created that system. The idea that you can vote anywhere in Maricopa County on election day. The vote center model, I brought that model into Maricopa County. These are innovations that aren't new completely, but we brought them in because that is the sort of pro-voter program that I wanted to make sure happened here. And I want to make sure it happens across the entire state. Now, moving into the Secretary of State's office very quickly, there's three major areas of concern in that office. First is election services, which usually dominates the conversation. Second, but equally important, is business services, UCC filings, trademark filings, and a whole bunch of other stuff to help businesses, particularly small businesses, do the things they need to do. And then the third area is public services, which can range anywhere from running the state museum, libraries, and archives, things of this nature, and being the keeper of the seal. There's that other little piece too. The Secretary of State happens to be Arizona's lieutenant governor, filling in for the chief executive in the absence of that officer. So this is a critically important office. And I think the bottom line is this: I come to you to present an individual who is interested in the sort of just the basic runnings of government. That we just got to do what we're charged with doing. We have to have predictable services and processes that people can understand, that they can have faith in, and not doubt other Americans, not doubt the job that's being done just because we didn't like the outcome of the last election. This is about stability. This is about reasonableness and an open door conversation. This is about really just kind of doing the job and getting out of the way so that Americans can do their other business, whether it's your regular business or industry or tech or law or medicine, arts and sciences, whatever it happens to be. Government should support that and help those things and those other parts of society advance. And the way we do that is, particularly in this office, just run basic elections, because elections are that basic heartbeat, that basic pulse. They should be predictable, they should be regular, and notwithstanding the result, we should just be able to depend on them happening. Elections are, as I've stated before, the golden thread that runs through the fabric of American society. And if you pull that thread out, the entire fabric disintegrates. And that's a real problem that we are facing. And that's why this election is so important. And that's why it's so critical that we have a Secretary of State who understands sort of the integration of all of the parts of our society and is willing to complement it with an office that just works well for folks, because I think that's really what anybody really just kind of wants. So, Diane, I'm happy to answer any questions. I do have a hard stop on the hour, but I really appreciate the chance to be here and chat with you and your folks, and I'm ready to go. So let's do it. I can't hear you.
You mentioned that the election services dominate the headlines about the Secretary of State. So one question to make it clear: do you run the elections?
Well, the Secretary of State does not run the elections. There's a sort of a two-layered system here. In Arizona, the 15 counties, which include duties executed by the county recorder, the election director, and the board of supervisors. The counties run and administer elections. The Secretary of State is the chief regulator of those elections by doing logic and accuracy tests on the equipment to make sure that it's running well, by certifying Arizona certified election officials, putting on those courses that allow certain individuals to execute certain assigned duties assigned by law or the elections procedures manual, by promulgating that elections procedures manual, which is basically the rule book for the 15 counties to run a consistent and well-informed and a posted set of rules, if you will. It has the force and effect of law, but it's promulgated by the secretary and approved by the attorney general and so forth. And so there's a lot of functions that the secretary executes vis-a-vis elections, but the secretary does not run elections on a day-to-day basis. We don't train poll workers. We don't pick polling sites. We don't do any of that specific stuff that the counties do. The counties really run them.
Right. I think that confuses people about who is actually in charge of that. What about registering to vote?
Well, that's a very interesting crossover as well. The 15 county recorders, of which I was one, are the registrar of voters. They're the folks who formally hold the record. That having been said, the voter registration system, the statewide database, is actually held and administered by the Secretary of State. So the data is owned and administered by the counties, but the database itself in the system is for the 13 counties outside of Pima and Maricopa is housed at the state. So it's an interesting synergy between those offices. And we have worked very diligently when I was county recorder, both with Secretary Reagan and then with Secretary Hobbs to make sure that those systems worked well.
And what is the job of the Secretary of State in relation to campaign finance?
Oh, certainly a very critical component. The Secretary of State is the regulator of campaign finance, and on notice of any, for example, violations or anything that might need to be investigated, that gets referred over to the Attorney General for further investigation. But the Secretary also maintains the database for campaign finance, where folks can see in certain races who is doing what. So, for example, if you're running for school board, the function of campaign finance runs through the counties, because your chief election officer is the superintendent of public instruction for the county, not for the state. But in federal races, so for president, Senate, and Congress, that falls under the Secretary of State's office. For statewide races, governor, Secretary of State, treasurer, superintendent of public education, mine inspector, corporation commissioners, that comes under the Secretary of State's office, and all the state Senate seats and all the state House seats. So we have sort of those different layers regulating in different ways, but the campaign finance stuff is also a very important part of the election regulation scheme that falls to the Secretary of State and its duties.
Well, the Secular Coalition has had occasion to file complaints about several candidates in the last run-up and also in this run-up, primarily because of churches campaigning.
Yep.
So many of them have been statewide, and when they were not, when they were county, then that was sent to me or sent back saying you got to go to the county.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in on that real quick, Dan, that's a good point. Look, if we don't have folks enforcing the rules, there's no sense having the rules in the first place, right? And so I think that while I've seen various secretaries going back, actually a couple of different officers, sort of looking at these things, I'm much more interested in making sure that folks who get their complaints filed get paid attention to and genuinely get listened to. So we're planning, one of the changes that I'm hoping to make is to have a little bit more of a robust approach to enforcing campaign finance violations. And if they happen to fall, if those complaints come in the future, in the way that you're describing them, then we certainly will be paying a little bit more attention to those, because again, there's no sense having rules if you're not going to be enforcing them, right?
We have a question from an attendee. I'm scheduled to be a poll worker for the first time. Will I be trained to spot irregular voting? And this might fall back on your job as when you were Maricopa County recorder.
Right. So, it depends. First and foremost, thank you. Thank you, whoever you are, for agreeing to work in this incredibly important post and making sure that your fellow citizens have their constitutional rights secured, because without folks like you, we don't have elections. And so I want to get that, right off the bat. Number two, you will be trained on what to look for and what not to look for. You'll be trained on what to pay attention to and what sorts of things you just really, are things that happen. Voting irregularities are very, very rare. And so without knowing sort of what it is specifically that you're talking about when you say voting irregularities, I won't be able to tell you whether or not you'll be trained in that area or not. But there are certainly efforts out there that I'm aware of that speak to the idea of voter intimidation, which is voter suppression at the end of the day, and some other things that are, may cause some problems with the system. We know that there are some folks out there whose goal it is to disrupt and cause issues, and that's unfortunate. But even down to the kinds of pens that you use. I'll give you, for example, in Maricopa County, there is a physical, actual reason why ballpoint pens are a bad idea. And that's because the election day tabulators have a little plastic film between the lens that does the viewing of the ballot and the ballot itself. And if you don't have quick drying ink like that of a Sharpie or one of those Pentel pens, if you use regular blue ink, for example, that could smudge. And that could cause that particular piece of equipment to go down, which could then cause more delays. And so a lot of the mythologies and misinformation and disinformation could actually cause a lot of problems instead of ensuring integrity, which some of these folks are saying that they want to push forward. So I would say follow the rules as presented by the election administrators at the county. They're the ones that know what their systems are supposed to, how they're supposed to run, and they're the ones who are actually running the show. So have faith in those fellow citizens. They're gonna do you right.
Well, let's go directly to that issue of misinformation and your comment that voting irregularities are rare. There was recently in the Capital Times an editorial about a finding that most Arizonans believe that our elections have been and are fair and transparent and all of that. However, this misinformation campaign is what gets the headlines. So what can you do as the Secretary of State to, I don't want to say restore our faith, because we never lost our faith,
Yeah.
but to counter that misinformation campaign?
Well, here's the thing, and Diane, allow me, if you will, to be a little bit more, maybe a little bit more aggressive than sometimes folks are comfortable with. We've got to call out the BS the minute that it happens, and I'm sick and tired of people countenancing the lies and not calling them lies immediately and not interrupting disproven mythologies the minute they get promoted, and not just flat out saying that's been debunked, that's a lie. We tend to want to be polite and we want to be kind, and I get that, I really get that, but it has the appearance in my experience so far that the folks that are pushing this sort of stuff, they take advantage of other people's politeness, they take advantage of the kindness of others and the generosity and the grace that others present them, to the detriment of our democracy, to the detriment of all of society, to the detriment of relationships that we have intra-America, right? The way that we feel about one another as people. And so the aggressiveness that they are meeting us with, I believe, needs to be fought back against with vigor. And in some circumstances, that's really all we've got because of the doubt that they've injected into the system. So while it is sometimes uncomfortable for folks, and I get that 100%. It's a fine balance that has to be stricken. I'm not going to be shy about calling out the BS when I see it. I have never been shy before about that, and I didn't spend 4 years in the Marine Corps just to learn good table manners. I know how to fight, and I'm going to fight back as hard as I can against this stuff. And I welcome any allies in that fight that might want to come along.
Well, I think we have to do something with the news media that continues to repeat these things and doesn't say exactly what is the truth, is that this is a lie.
Well, you know, Diane, I do hear a little bit more now when somebody talks about my opponent. Almost every time they'll say, well, he has said this about the election, which is unfounded, which is not based in fact, which has been disproven. We're starting to hear that a little bit more and more from the media. I think it's about 18 months too late. I think they've allowed it to go too far out of deference, out of kindness. And frankly, because I think the folks that promote the big lie, they're kind of a bunch of big whiners. You know, and the minute they get challenged, they start screaming and yelling about, oh, you're impinging on my First Amendment right to lie, or whatever it is. And I'm not a big fan of that. So I think that the faith that we have lost in one another is worth fighting back for, right? I want to believe, I want us all to believe in each other as Americans again. I want us all to feel good about being Americans together with Republicans and independents and libertarians again, that we're all on the same side. You know, I remember as a kid, the unity that we felt. Imagine it. It was quite a while ago, the Olympics at Lake Placid, when the American hockey team, a bunch of amateur kids, beat the Soviet Empire in that gold medal match. Boy, I'll tell you what, there were no political divisions. We were all proud Americans at that moment. And that sort of unity seems to be waning pretty quickly nowadays. And it's not a nationalist feel, it's a humanist sort of a feel. As Americans, we need to get back to that. And I think fighting hard for the truth and fighting hard for Americans who run our elections, to me, that's worth it. It's worth it.
Well, speaking of another group of people who engage in misinformation, what is the role of the Secretary of State regarding lobbyists?
Well, the Secretary of State registers lobbyists and does some lobbyist regulation as well. And, lobbyists play a critical role in our government. They really, in a lot of ways, they help to educate our legislators. It would be one thing for a legislator to have the time and the energy to go to a whole bunch of different schools and spend literally weeks and weeks and weeks trying to figure some stuff out, versus sitting with a lobbyist from the Arizona Education Association and getting a summary of the concerns of educators out there. And you can say lobbyists sometimes will abuse that power and will work for special interests. Of course, there's no question about that. But the idea of the conversation is really what is embodied in the idea of lobbyists. And I think while they've got a bad rap, they're not all terrible. And some of them really do offer some insights. Let me give you for example. Just the other day, I was talking to a lobbyist from APS, Arizona Public Service, right? The Tower of Power, the great evil utility that a lot of people look down on. And I found out that the Palo Verde power plant out on the west side of town is run 100% on effluent water. And that is post-use water. That's like after you flush the toilet, it goes to cool the water tower out there. It's the only nuclear power plant in the world that's not by a major waterway. It's not next to a river or the ocean or a big lake or something like that. And that's because it uses pre-used water from 6 different municipalities that gets pumped out there to cool. So it's really using that resource in a way that isn't typical. And that's a really interesting piece of work, whether you like nuclear power or not. And I learned that because a lobbyist was talking to me about some of these things. And I was like, wow, that's kind of cool to know. So, I think they offer some value in the conversation. But at the end of the day, what we need to make sure is that we come to these things with open eyes and that the rules that need to be followed get followed, so that these folks don't have an undue influence on our legislators, so that they don't have more influence than they ought to, given the role that they should be playing in this democratic republic.
Okay, we have another question from a member of the audience. If the Oath Keepers are declared a terrorist organization, New Zealand has already done this, would the Arizona members of the Oath Keepers, people who have admitted that they are members of the Oath Keepers, be disqualified for public office?
Well, you hope so, right? Because that means my opponent would be disqualified, since he's been an Oath Keeper since 2014. Although I will tell you, he has recently backed away from that, which, whatever. He's lied about a whole bunch of other stuff. And so this may be another one. I like to extend this question a little bit to another issue, and that is the issue of sovereignty. New Zealand can recognize whoever they want, however they want. That doesn't necessarily mean that the United States of America is obligated to reflect that recognition. And so we are our own nation. Arizona is its own state within this federal republic. And so I'm respectfully not going to be taking orders from any Kiwis. We will defend them if they get attacked, of course, under whatever treaties apply. But we've got to run our own show here in the United States of America.
Well, I don't think the suggestion was that we were obligated to do that, but that we might take such an action ourselves.
Well, if we do, great, because then the choice for secretary becomes much, much easier than it is right now.
Narrows, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, there is some, there are some documents on the website about how people can run for office themselves. Can you just give us a minute or two? I know we're getting almost to the end here, about how this Secretary of State could help the average American who wants to run for office do so and participate in our democracy in that way?
Well, that's a great question. First and foremost, start early. Start really, really early, because a lot of people don't even start thinking about these things until it's too late. Because a lot of times the filing deadlines to either begin getting your petition signatures or to get your petition signatures, that happened months and months and months and months ago, long time ago. And most people don't realize that, because elections are not the first thing on anybody's mind. Service might be, but how you get into those offices might not be. So the Secretary of State could definitely take a much more assertive and forward-leaning role into helping regular citizens understand what the timelines are, and really be more forward-facing when it comes to these sorts of things, particularly when it comes to a lot of local elections, right? And the Secretary really doesn't bother too much on like school board races, right? In the various school districts across Arizona, or a lot of the municipal races, which are, again, not particularly of interest other than voter registration and so forth to the Secretary of State's office. But we definitely could put a lot more information out there regarding these deadlines. And more importantly, I think the critical component is this. First and foremost, find out when those offices have their elections. Contact the election officer for those offices. In a city, it would be the clerk, the city clerk. In a school district, it would be the superintendent of public education for the county. Those are the election officers who would have the timelines. Ask way ahead of time, sometimes even up to a year ahead of time, and understand this. Those elections happen sometimes in 4 different dates of the year. Arizona has election days in March, May, August, and November every single year, depending on the district, whether it's a water district, a fire district, a waste management district. So public offices run the gamut, everything from justices of the peace and constables all the way up to the president of the United States. So paying attention to these things way ahead of time, being interested, finding out who those election officers are things that folks can do. The Secretary of State's office certainly could be a much, much more useful resource when it comes to helping citizens get engaged civically. And that's something I absolutely am hoping to be able to do for all of Arizona's citizens.
Okay, we have 2 minutes. I know you have a hard stop. Do you want to take the last couple of minutes and for your final statement, or what you want to get to?
Yes. Thank you so much, Diane. First and foremost, thank you, everybody, for being on this call. The fact that you're on this call means you care. And that's important. We've got to care about one another, right? We're all in this together at the end of the day. And so that's important. I want to thank you all. Number 2, please consider, who takes the time to come and talk to you, but at the same time, what we're talking about. You haven't heard me talk very much about what happened in 2020, but you have heard me talk about what could happen in the future, how we could work together, how we could do better. And it's that forward look, it's that progression ahead. I think that's critically important when we're picking our public officers. Now, I will be the most experienced Secretary of State to take office should I get your support and win. I have a CIRA certification. I'm a certified election and registration administrator from the Election Center at Auburn University. I am an attorney. I'm a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. What qualifies me, I think, the most is the fact that I've got 3 teenage daughters who are depending on us to make sure that their future is at least as bright as ours has been, even in spite of the fact that some of their rights have been stripped from them, that many of you have enjoyed through the majority of your lives. This is an important time in our history. We've got to have thoughtful folks who just want things to work well in these offices. My name is Adrian Francis. You can find out more about me at electfontis.com. That's electfontis.com. And with that, I hope that I can earn your support and your vote. And I very much hope I can serve as Arizona's next Secretary of State. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adrian, and thank all of you for attending. And she has also put your site in the chat. So please, everybody, have a good night. Thank you.
Night, everybody. Thank you.